Hello everyone, welcome to Boring History Channel. Tonight we're stepping into a world where danger wasn't avoided. It was chosen. Imagine jobs so deadly that one mistake meant death. Yet people competed to do them. Why would anyone willingly walk into fire, disease, and near certain risk? Just to earn a living? The answer is stranger and more human. Tonight you think. So dim the lights, relax your mind, and let history quietly unfold. And before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy the stories I share here. In the medieval world, danger was not an exception, but a constant companion, woven into daily life through disease, war, and unpredictable living conditions. Yet some of the most hazardous occupations were not forced upon people, but actively sought after, driven by necessity, status, or the promise of reward. Among these, the life of a miner stood out as one of the most perilous, where individuals willingly descended into suffocating, unstable tunnels with little more than primitive tools, knowing that cave, inns, toxic gases, and long-term lung diseases were almost inevitable. Yet the lure of valuable metals like silver and gold made the risk worthwhile, especially since successful miners could earn more than common laborers. Similarly, blacksmiths embraced a life surrounded by fire, molten metal, and constant physical strain, where a single misstep could result in severe burns or permanent injury. But their skill placed them at the heart of medieval economies, giving them both respect and relative financial stability. Another striking example was the profession of a gong farmer, responsible for cleaning out human waste from cesspits and privies, a job so foul and dangerous due to toxic fumes and risk of infection that it had to be done at night. Yet it paid surprisingly well, attracting workers who were willing to endure the stench and stigma in exchange for higher wages. Executioners, too, occupied a uniquely feared yet necessary role, tasked with carrying out sentences of death or punishment. Despite the social isolation and moral burden they faced, many pursued this profession because it came with steady income, housing, and certain legal protections that others lacked, creating a paradox where a reviled figure could also be economically secure. Even within the realm of warfare, positions like mercenaries or knights were actively pursued, despite the near certainty of violence and death, as the potential for wealth, land, and honor outweighed the risks. And for some, it was one of the few paths to upward mobility in a rigid social hierarchy. Tanners, who processed animal hides into leather, worked in environments filled with rotting flesh, urine, and toxic chemicals, often on the outskirts of towns due to the unbearable smell. Yet their craft was essential, and demand for leather goods ensured a consistent livelihood, making the hardship tolerable for those who mastered the trade. Likewise, sailors ventured into unpredictable seas in fragile wooden ships, facing storms, piracy, disease, and starvation. But the promise of trade profits and the allure of distant lands drew many to a life that was as adventurous as it was deadly. Rat catchers, another unusual yet vital occupation, risked bites and deadly diseases like the plague, while trying to control vermin populations. Yet their services were in high demand, especially during outbreaks, providing them with a steady, if dangerous, source of income. Apothecaries and early physicians also operated in a risky environment, not only because of their exposure to contagious diseases, but also due to the limited medical knowledge of the time, where treatments could be as harmful as the illnesses themselves. Still, the prestige and intellectual pursuit associated with healing made it an appealing path. Even castle builders and masons worked under constant threat of falling from great heights or being crushed by heavy stones. But their craftsmanship contributed to monumental structures that symbolized power and permanence, offering them a sense of purpose and legacy. What ties all these professions together is the remarkable human ability to weigh danger against reward and still choose the path that offers hope, status, or survival, revealing that even in one of history's harshest periods, people were not merely victims of circumstance, but active participants in shaping their destinies, often stepping willingly into roles that modern sensibilities would consider unthinkable, driven by a mix of ambition, necessity, and resilience that defined the medieval experience. Beyond these already perilous roles, medieval society offered even more occupations where danger was not just a possibility, but an expectation, yet people still stepped forward to take them on. Consider the life of a chimney sweep, often a young boy or a small-built man, who would climb into narrow, soot-filled flues with almost no protection, inhaling toxic particles that slowly destroyed their lungs while risking suffocation or becoming stuck in tight passages. Despite this, the job remained in demand because it provided income to the poorest families. Then there were fuller workers, whose job was to clean and thicken cloth by trampling it in vats filled with a mixture of water, clay, and often human urine, exposing themselves daily to infections and harmful chemicals. Yet this unpleasant labor was essential for the booming textile industry and offered a reliable wage. In urban centers, night watchmen patrolled dark, crime-ridden streets, armed with little more than a lantern and a stick, facing thieves, drunkards, and sometimes violent mobs. But the role provided a sense of authority and a modest but steady income. Another surprisingly dangerous profession was that of a messenger or courier who travelled long distances across unsafe roads plagued by bandits, wild animals, and harsh weather, carrying important documents or goods. Despite the risks, the job appealed to those seeking adventure and a chance to move beyond the confines of village life. Similarly, bridge keepers and toll collectors often worked in isolated locations where they were vulnerable to robbery or attack. Yet the position came with control over an important passage and a share of collected tolls, making it financially attractive. In ports and river towns, dock workers and stevedores handled heavy cargo with rudimentary equipment, risking crushed limbs or drowning. But the constant flow of trade ensured employment and the possibility of better earnings compared to agricultural labor. Even more extreme were those who worked as plague buriers during outbreaks of disease, a role that required handling infected bodies and working in close proximity to death on a daily basis. Many took up this job because it paid significantly higher wages during crises, highlighting how desperation and opportunity often intersected. Firefighters, though not organized as they are today, were often ordinary citizens or hired men who would rush into burning buildings with buckets and basic tools, facing intense heat, collapsing structures, and suffocating smoke. Yet the role carried a sense of heroism and communal respect. In forests, charcoal burners lived in isolation for weeks or months, slowly converting wood into charcoal in smouldering kilns that released dangerous fumes, all while being exposed to wildlife and harsh environmental conditions. But their product was crucial for metalworking and other industries, ensuring steady demand. Hunters and trappers too willingly faced danger from wild animals, including wolves and boars, as well as the unpredictability of the wilderness. But the rewards of meat, fur, and trade goods made the risks worthwhile. Fishermen, especially those working in rough coastal waters, battled storms, capsizing boats, and long periods of uncertainty. Yet the sea provided one of the few ways to secure both food and income, drawing many into its dangers. Even entertainers, such as traveling performers or jesters, faced risks while moving between towns, including theft, assault, or being unwelcome in certain regions. Yet the freedom of the road and the chance to earn through skill and creativity made the life appealing. Perhaps one of the most psychologically taxing roles was that of a soldier guarding city walls or castles during sieges, where they endured not only the threat of attack, but also starvation, disease, and relentless stress. Yet the promise of loyalty rewards, payment, or advancement kept many committed. Likewise, those who worked in early construction of cathedrals and large structures often operated at dizzying heights without safety measures, facing fatal falls or injuries. But their work was seen as both spiritually meaningful and socially significant. Even farmers, often perceived as having simpler lives, dealt with back-breaking labor, unpredictable weather, and the constant threat of famine. Yet it remained the backbone of society and a role that people took pride in sustaining. All of these professions reveal a deeper truth about medieval life. Danger was not something to be avoided at all costs, but something to be managed, endured, and sometimes even embraced if it meant survival, dignity, or advancement. People were not blindly walking into these roles. They understood the risks, but also recognized the limited choices available to them. And within those constraints, they made decisions that balanced fear with hope. The willingness to take on such hazardous work speaks to a resilience that defined the era, where even the most dangerous jobs could become desirable when they offered a path, however uncertain, toward a better life, stability, or recognition in a world where safety was never guaranteed and opportunity often came dressed in danger. And still, the list of dangerous medieval occupations continues to stretch further, revealing just how deeply risk was embedded in everyday survival and ambition. Take the life of a lime burner, for instance, a worker who heated limestone in massive kilns to produce quicklime, an essential material for construction. The process released caustic dust and fumes that could burn the skin, damage the eyes, and severely harm the lungs. Yet the demand for building materials ensured that this hazardous trade remained attractive to those seeking consistent work. Similarly, glassmakers operated in extreme heat, standing before blazing furnaces for long hours. And even beyond these, medieval life continued to offer roles where danger was not only accepted but almost expected as part of the profession, drawing in individuals who either had little choice or saw opportunity where others saw only risk. Consider the life of a pitchmaker, someone who boiled tar and resin to create waterproofing materials for ships and buildings. The process involved thick, suffocating fumes and highly flammable substances that could ignite at any moment. Yet this trade was crucial for maritime industries and construction, making it a steady source of income. Likewise, potters and kiln workers spent long hours tending blazing ovens, where extreme heat, toxic smoke, and the possibility of kiln explosions posed constant threats. But the demand for pottery in everyday life ensured that skilled workers could maintain a livelihood. In agricultural settings, threshers who separated grain from husks often worked with flails or early mechanical devices, risking repetitive strain injuries or accidental blows that could be severe. Yet their role was essential in food production. Beekeepers, while seemingly peaceful, faced repeated stings and the risk of severe allergic reactions while harvesting honey and wax. But these products were valuable commodities used in food, medicine, and candle making the danger worthwhile. Similarly, shepherds guarding flocks in remote areas dealt with predators, harsh weather, and isolation. Yet the responsibility came with a degree of independence and trust that appealed to many. Another lesser known but hazardous occupation was that of a salt miner or salt pan worker, who laboured in environments where salt dust could damage the skin and lungs, and where dehydration and exhaustion were constant risks. Still, salt was an incredibly valuable resource, often referred to as white gold, ensuring that those involved in its production had steady work. In towns, brewers and alewives handled large vats of boiling liquids and worked around open flames, risking burns or fires. But the universal demand for ale made brewing one of the more reliable trades. Even more intense was the role of a stone quarrier, who extracted large blocks of stone from cliffs or pits using primitive tools. Rockfalls, tool accidents, and physical exhaustion were common. Yet their labour fed directly into the construction of castles, churches, and city walls, giving their work a visible and lasting impact. Similarly, road builders and ditch diggers toiled in difficult conditions, often exposed to the elements, and using heavy tools that could cause injury. But their work improved trade routes and connectivity, making it essential for growing economies. In the realm of textiles, dyers worked with chemical substances derived from plants, minerals, and even insects, some of which were toxic or produced harmful fumes. Prolonged exposure could lead to serious health issues. Yet vibrant dyes were highly prized, and skilled dyers could earn a respectable living. Candle makers, too, handled hot wax and open flames, sometimes using animal fats that produced unpleasant and potentially harmful smoke. But candles were a necessity in a world without electricity, ensuring constant demand. Even within transportation, cart drivers and wagoners faced the risk of accidents on poorly maintained roads, dealing with runaway animals, broken wheels, or ambushes. Yet the job offered mobility and the chance to engage in trade networks. Ferrymen, who transported people and goods across rivers, risked drowning during strong currents or storms, but their control over vital crossings made the role both important and profitable. There were also those who worked as early demolition labourers, tearing down old or unsafe structures, often without proper tools or safety measures, facing collapsing debris and dust inhalation. Yet this work was necessary for urban renewal and expansion. Leather dressers and parchment makers used chemicals like lime and worked with animal remains, exposing themselves to both physical and biological hazards. But their products were indispensable for writing, clothing, and equipment. Even children, unfortunately, were part of this dangerous workforce, taking on roles like apprentices in workshops where they were exposed to the same risks as adults. From sharp tools to toxic substances, yet apprenticeship was one of the few ways to learn a trade and secure a future. And in markets, vendors and traders faced the constant threat of theft, disputes, or even violence, especially in crowded or poorly regulated areas. But the potential for profit and independence drew many into commerce. All of this paints an even broader picture of a world where safety was a luxury few could afford to prioritize, and where the line between survival and danger was incredibly thin. People did not necessarily seek danger for its own sake, but they accepted it as part of the cost of living, working, and striving for something better. In many cases, the very factors that made these jobs dangerous, scarcity of skill, difficulty of labor, or unpleasant conditions, also made them more valuable, creating a cycle where risk and reward were tightly intertwined. Ultimately, the persistence of individuals choosing such paths highlights a powerful aspect of human nature: the willingness to endure hardship in pursuit of stability, recognition, or even a small improvement in quality of life. In the medieval world, where uncertainty was constant and options were limited, danger became almost normalized, and those who embraced it often found themselves not just surviving, but carving out a place for themselves in a society that demanded resilience at every turn. And still, even after considering all these roles, the medieval world continues to reveal even more occupations where danger was deeply embedded in the daily routine. Yet people stepped into them willingly because they offered purpose, income, or a rare sense of control over one's life. Take the role of a well digger. For example, a person who excavated deep shafts into the earth to access water, often working in confined, unstable pits where collapses, suffocation, or sudden flooding could occur without warning. Yet access to clean water was vital, making this job both necessary and consistently in demand. Similarly, canal and ditch workers labored in muddy, waterlogged environments, facing risks of drowning, infections, and exhaustion. But their work helped shape irrigation systems and transport routes that supported entire communities. In forested regions, woodcutters and loggers faced constant threats from falling trees, sharp tools, and unpredictable terrain. Yet timber was essential for construction, fuel, and tools, ensuring that their dangerous labor remained indispensable. Resin collectors, who tapped trees for sap used in various industries, often climbed tall trunks without modern safety equipment, risking serious falls. But the materials they gathered were valuable for sealing, preserving, and crafting. Likewise, charcoal transporters carried heavy loads through rough landscapes, exposed to fatigue, bandit attacks, and environmental hazards. Yet the demand for fuel in workshops and homes kept this trade alive. In towns and cities, those who worked as street cleaners dealt with waste, rotting materials, and disease, carrying pests on a daily basis, exposing themselves to illness. Yet their role was crucial in maintaining some level of sanitation in crowded urban areas. Water carriers, who delivered water to households, often traveled long distances with heavy loads, risking physical strain and accidents. But the job offered a steady, if modest, income. Bakers, too, worked in intense heat with large ovens that could cause severe burns, while also facing the constant pressure of feeding growing populations. Yet bread being a staple food, meant their trade was always needed. Another surprisingly risky occupation was that of a stable hand responsible for caring for horses, which could be unpredictable, and dangerous animals. Kicks, bites, and trampling were real threats. Yet working with horses offered opportunities in transport, trade, and even military support roles. Falcon nest raiders who climbed cliffs to collect young birds or eggs faced extreme heights and unstable footing, but the rewards of valuable birds made the danger worthwhile. Similarly, pearl divers in certain regions plunged into deep waters without modern equipment, risking drowning or pressure-related injuries. Yet the rarity and beauty of pearls ensured high value. Even more intense were those involved in early forms of firefighting beyond towns. Individuals who cleared forests or controlled burns to prevent larger disasters, often working with little more than basic tools and facing rapidly spreading flames. Yet their efforts protected settlements and resources. Icehouse workers, who stored and managed ice for long-term use, operated in freezing conditions that could lead to frostbite or illness. But their work supported food preservation and trade. In marketplaces, money changers and traders handled valuable goods and currency, making them targets for theft or violence. Yet the potential for profit and influence attracted many. Toll gate guards and gatekeepers controlled access to towns or roads, often dealing with disputes, smugglers, or armed travelers. But their authority and share of tolls made the position appealing. Even teachers or tutors, particularly those instructing noble families, faced social pressures and the risk of punishment if expectations were not met. Yet education was a respected path that offered stability and intellectual engagement. On the fringes of society, there were also those who took on roles like pest exterminators beyond rats, dealing with snakes, insects, or other dangerous creatures, risking bites and disease, yet providing an essential service. And even after all these examples, the medieval world still offers more glimpses into how deeply danger and desire for opportunity were intertwined, with people continuing to step into roles that demanded both physical endurance and mental resilience. Consider the work of a moat cleaner, someone tasked with maintaining the defensive water systems around castles, often wading through stagnant foul, smelling water filled with waste, sharp debris and disease. Yet the job was necessary for maintaining fortifications and offered steady employment tied to powerful lords. Similarly, roof thatchers climbed to the tops of buildings to repair or construct roofs using straw or reeds, balancing on steep surfaces without any safety equipment, constantly at risk of falling. But their craft was essential in nearly every settlement and brought consistent demand. In agricultural processing, cider makers and wine press workers handled heavy machinery and large pressing systems that could malfunction or cause injury, while also working around fermenting substances that produced fumes. Yet the production of beverages was central to daily life and trade. In colder climates, fur processors worked with animal pelts using chemicals and manual scraping tools, exposing themselves to infections and harsh conditions. But fur was a valuable commodity, especially for the wealthy. Likewise, soap makers handled caustic substances like lye, which could cause severe burns and long-term damage if mishandled. Yet soap was crucial for hygiene and cleaning, making the profession both necessary and profitable. Even more obscure roles included that of a bellows operator in metal workshops, who maintained the airflow needed to keep furnaces burning at high temperatures. While the job might seem simple, it required long hours in intense heat and proximity to dangerous equipment, but it was a gateway into skilled trades like blacksmithing. Similarly, apprentices in alchemical practices worked with unknown substances, vapors, and experimental mixtures, often without understanding the risks. Yet the promise of discovery and advancement drew them into such uncertain environments. In transport and logistics, pack animal handlers guided caravans across long and hazardous routes, facing exhaustion, theft, and environmental dangers. But the role connected them to trade networks and potential profits. Harbour pilots who guided ships into difficult ports needed deep knowledge of tides and currents. But any miscalculation could lead to shipwrecks, making it a high-risk yet respected profession. Even lighthouse keepers, in coastal regions where such structures existed in early forms, endured isolation, storms, and constant vigilance to maintain signals. Yet their work was vital for maritime safety. There were also those who worked in early forms of entertainment infrastructure, such as stage builders or fairground setup workers, who handled heavy materials and temporary structures that could collapse. Yet their work enabled festivals and gatherings that were central to social life. In towns, scale testers and inspectors checked weights and measures in markets, sometimes facing hostility or conflict when disputes arose. But their authority and role in maintaining fairness gave them a unique position. Another demanding role was that of a manuscript courier, who transported valuable handwritten texts between monasteries or cities, risking theft, weather damage, or personal harm. Yet being trusted with such items brought a sense of importance and responsibility. Similarly, relic hunters or traders sought out religious artifacts, traveling to distant and often dangerous places, driven by both faith and the potential for profit. Even within domestic settings, servants responsible for maintaining large estates faced risks from heavy labor, fire hazards, and sometimes harsh treatment. Yet such positions provided shelter and food, which were not guaranteed elsewhere. Gardeners and herbal collectors ventured into forests or remote areas to gather plants, risking encounters with wild animals or poisonous species. Yet their knowledge of nature made them valuable in both culinary and medicinal contexts. In essence, the medieval world did not separate safety from work in the way modern societies attempt to. Instead, risk was an accepted and often unavoidable companion to productivity and progress. People pursued these roles not out of ignorance, but out of a clear understanding that every path carried its own dangers, and that some risks were worth taking if they offered stability, skill, or even a slight improvement in status. What makes this even more compelling is that many of these individuals found meaning in their work despite, or perhaps because of, the risks involved. The danger added a certain weight to their efforts, a sense that what they were doing mattered not just economically, but socially, and even personally. Whether standing atop a roof, deep within the earth, out at sea, or surrounded by fire and fumes, medieval workers lived with a constant awareness of uncertainty. Yet they continued forward, shaping their world one risky task at a time, and so. The story of these dangerous jobs is not just about hardship, but about human adaptability, the ability to accept challenging conditions, and still find ways to build, create, and survive. It is a reminder that throughout history, People have often chosen paths that demanded courage not because they were easy, but because they were necessary, meaningful, or offered a glimpse of something better, even if that better future came with very real and immediate risks. And even after tracing through so many of these perilous occupations, the medieval world still reveals yet more roles where danger was not merely a side effect, but a constant, unavoidable presence, accepted almost as a condition of living itself. Consider the work of a bell founder, who cast massive church bells by pouring molten metal into large molds. The process required precision under extreme heat, and any mistake could lead to explosions of liquid metal or collapsing molds. Yet the importance of bells in marking time, prayer, and community life ensured that this dangerous craft remained respected and in demand. Similarly, tile makers and brick kiln workers spent long hours near blazing furnaces, inhaling smoke and dust while handling heavy materials, but their contribution to building durable homes and structures made their labor indispensable. In river-based economies, dredgers worked to clear silt and debris from waterways, often standing in unstable boats or wading into currents where drowning was a real risk. Yet maintaining navigable rivers was crucial for trade and transport. Ferry repair workers and ship carpenters who maintained vessels faced hazards from sharp tools, heavy wood, and unstable working conditions near water. But their expertise ensured the survival of maritime trade. Even coopers, who crafted barrels, handled tools and materials that could cause injury. And though less obviously dangerous, the repetitive strain and precision required made it a physically demanding trade that not everyone could endure. In more isolated and extreme environments, salt marsh workers harvested salt from coastal flats under intense sun exposure, dealing with dehydration, skin damage, and exhausting labor. Yet salt remained one of the most valuable commodities in the medieval economy. Peat cutters in marshlands dug and dried blocks of peat for fuel, often working in wet, unstable ground where sinking or injury was common. But their product was essential for heating in certain regions. Likewise, turf cutters faced similar conditions, enduring both environmental hardship and physical strain. Even those who worked in food preparation at a larger scale, such as cooks in castles or monasteries, faced dangers from open flames, heavy cauldrons of boiling liquid, and long hours in intense heat. Yet these positions could offer stability, especially within noble households. Slaughterhouse workers dealt with large animals, sharp tools, and unsanitary conditions, risking both injury and disease. But meat production was a vital industry that sustained entire populations. Fishmongers, handling slippery catches and sharp knives, also worked in conditions where accidents and infections were common. Yet the steady demand for fish made it a reliable trade. In the sphere of maintenance and repair, ladder makers and scaffold builders constructed temporary structures used in construction and repairs, often testing their own creations at dangerous heights, where a single miscalculation could lead to fatal falls. Yet their skills enabled countless other trades to function. Rope bridge builders in mountainous or river-crossing regions worked under extreme conditions, balancing over heights with minimal support. But their work connected communities and trade routes that would otherwise remain isolated. There were also those involved in early forms of waste recycling, such as bone collectors who gathered animal remains to be processed into tools, glue, or fertilizer, exposing themselves to decay and disease, yet turning waste into usable materials made their work economically valuable. Ash collectors gathered residues from fires for use in soap making or agriculture, often dealing with fine particles that could harm the lungs, but their role supported multiple other industries. Even more psychologically demanding were those who worked as informants or spies during times of political tension or conflict. Moving in secrecy and constantly at risk of being discovered and punished severely. Yet the potential rewards or protection offered by powerful patrons made such roles tempting. Town criers, while seemingly harmless, sometimes faced hostile crowds when delivering unpopular news or decrees. Yet their position gave them visibility and a unique role in communication. And even still, the tapestry of medieval labour continues to unfold with more roles where danger and determination walked side by side, revealing just how normalized risk had become in the pursuit of livelihood and meaning. Consider the work of a tower watchman stationed atop high structures to observe approaching threats or fires, often exposed to harsh winds, lightning storms, and the constant risk of falling from dizzying heights. Yet the position carried a sense of vigilance and responsibility that made it both respected and necessary. Similarly, clock keepers in later medieval towns maintained early mechanical clocks in tall towers, working with heavy gears and elevated platforms where a single slip could be fatal. But their role in regulating time gave them a unique importance in increasingly organized urban life. In regions prone to flooding, levee builders and repairers worked tirelessly to construct and maintain barriers against rising waters, often laboring under urgent conditions where failure could mean disaster for entire communities. Yet their work directly protected lives and property, making it a vital and valued occupation. Sand and gravel collectors, who gathered materials from riverbeds, faced unstable footing and the constant danger of sudden currents. But these resources were essential for construction and infrastructure. Even more physically taxing were those who worked as human-powered crane operators, using treadwheel cranes to lift heavy stones during construction. These workers walked inside massive wheels, suspended at height, where a misstep could lead to severe injury or death. Yet their strength and coordination were crucial for building monumental structures. Similarly, pile drivers who hammered wooden supports into the ground for foundations dealt with heavy equipment and repetitive impact forces, risking injury but contributing to the stability of buildings and bridges. In colder and harsher environments, avalanche watchers or mountain path maintainers kept routes open for travel, facing extreme weather, falling snow, and isolation. Yet their efforts enabled trade and communication across difficult terrains. Ice transporters carried large blocks over long distances, often slipping on treacherous surfaces or suffering from exposure. But their work supported preservation and storage systems that benefited entire communities. Within towns, lantern bearers or link boys guided people through dark streets at night, navigating crime-prone areas and unpredictable situations. Yet their service was valued in an era without public lighting. Similarly, early sanitation workers who managed drainage channels and waste flow systems worked in hazardous, disease-prone environments, but their efforts were essential in preventing outbreaks and maintaining some level of urban hygiene. Even more niche roles included parchment stretchers, who prepared animal skins for for writing by scraping and stretching them on frames, often using sharp tools and working with decaying materials. Yet their work supported the production of books and records. Ink makers handled mixtures that sometimes included toxic ingredients like metals or plant extracts, exposing themselves to harmful substances, but their craft was central to communication and documentation. In military support roles beyond the battlefield, armor polishers and weapon maintainers worked with heavy and sharp equipment, risking cuts and strain injuries. Yet their attention to detail ensured the effectiveness of soldiers in combat. Siege engineers, who designed and operated large war machines, faced the danger of mechanical failure or enemy attack. Yet their expertise could determine the outcome of entire conflicts. Even in more routine settings, laundry workers, particularly those serving large households or institutions, handled boiling water, heavy fabrics, and harsh cleaning agents, risking burns and physical exhaustion. Yet their role was essential in maintaining cleanliness. Candle snuffers and lamp maintainers worked with open flames in enclosed spaces where accidents could quickly turn into devastating fires. But their presence ensured light in a dark world. There were also those who worked as boundary markers or surveyors, traveling across lands to define property lines, often encountering disputes, harsh conditions, or even violence. Yet their work was critical in organizing land ownership and preventing conflicts. Toll road repairers maintained pathways used by travelers and traders, facing constant wear, environmental challenges, and sometimes hostility. But their labor kept commerce moving. What becomes even more striking with each additional example is the realization that medieval people did not categorize jobs primarily by safety or danger, but by necessity and opportunity. The question was rarely, is this safe? But rather, can this sustain me? And is it worth the risk? And for many, the answer led them into roles that demanded courage, not just in moments of crisis, but as a daily habit. These workers lived in a world where uncertainty was constant, yet they adapted, learned, and persevered, often finding pride in their ability to endure what others might avoid. The danger did not strip their work of value. Instead, it often enhanced it, making their contributions all the more significant in the eyes of their communities. And so, as this long chain of hazardous occupations continues, it paints a vivid and almost humbling picture of medieval life, not as a time of passive suffering, but as an era defined by active resilience. People chose these paths because they offered something: income, identity, stability, or even a sense of purpose. And in doing so, they demonstrated a quiet but powerful truth, that even in the most uncertain and dangerous conditions, human beings will continue to seek ways to build, to contribute, and to move forward, one risky step at a time. And even now, after exploring so many layers of medieval labor, there are still more roles that reveal how deeply risk was woven into the fabric of everyday survival, where people knowingly stepped into danger because it offered structure, income, or even a sense of belonging. Consider the role of a signal firekeeper, stationed on hilltops or towers to light warning beacons in times of invasion or emergency. These individuals worked in isolation, exposed to harsh weather and the constant threat of attack. Yet their responsibility was crucial for communication across vast distances, making their position one of quiet importance. Similarly, road wardens or path guardians were tasked with overseeing stretches of travel routes, often confronting bandits or disputes among travelers, yet their authority and connection to local power made the role appealing despite its risks. In marshy or coastal areas, reed cutters harvested materials used for roofing and weaving, working in waterlogged terrain where footing was uncertain and exposure to disease was high, but their work supported essential industries like thatching and basket making. Likewise, net makers and repairers, especially those tied to fishing communities, handled heavy, wet materials and sharp tools, often working near water where accidents could easily occur. Yet their craft was indispensable to sustaining fishing economies. Even more physically intense were those who worked as bell tower climbers responsible for maintenance, scaling narrow ladders and unstable structures to repair mechanisms high above the ground, facing vertigo and the constant risk of falling. Yet their specialized skills ensured that timekeeping and signaling systems continued to function. Similarly, windmill operators worked with massive rotating blades and complex machinery, where mechanical failures or misjudgments could lead to serious injury, but their role in grinding grain made them central to food production. In the world of storage and preservation, granary keepers managed large quantities of grain, often dealing with dust that could cause respiratory issues or even explosions in enclosed spaces. Yet their responsibility in safeguarding food supplies gave them a critical role in community survival. Ice pit workers maintained underground storage systems, dealing with slippery surfaces and freezing conditions. But their work extended the usability of perishable goods. Even occupations tied to animals carried significant risks beyond the obvious. Pig handlers, for instance, managed animals that could be aggressive and unpredictable, while also working in unsanitary conditions that exposed them to disease. Yet pork, being a staple food, ensured that this role remained necessary. Dog handlers, particularly those involved in guarding or hunting, faced bites, injuries, and the challenge of controlling trained animals. But their work was valued in both security and sport. In craft industries, loom operators in textile workshops worked with fast-moving parts that could catch clothing or fingers, leading to injuries. Yet the demand for fabric made their labor constant and essential. Metal engravers and coin minters handled fine tools and sometimes toxic materials, working with intense focus where a single slip could ruin work or cause harm. But their skills contributed directly to commerce and art. There were also those who worked in early forms of crowd management during fairs, markets, or public events, navigating large gatherings where disputes or accidents could quickly escalate. Yet these events were central to social and economic life, making such roles necessary. Gate closers, responsible for shutting city gates at specific times, often dealt with late arrivals, arguments, or even threats. Yet their control over entry and exit gave them a position of authority. In more remote or rugged regions, pathfinders and trail markers guided others through forests, mountains, or unfamiliar lands. And even after uncovering so many layers of medieval occupations, there are still more roles that show how people continuously embraced danger as part of their everyday reality, often seeing it not as a barrier, but as a path towards survival or significance. Consider the role of a flood marker or river watcher, individuals who monitored rising water levels and warned nearby communities. They often stood for long hours near unpredictable waters, risking sudden surges, drowning, or exposure to harsh conditions. Yet their vigilance could save entire villages, giving their work a profound sense of purpose. Similarly, dam repair workers labored under immense pressure during times of structural weakness, sometimes working directly against rushing water, where a single failure could sweep them away. But their efforts were critical in protecting farmland and settlements. In growing towns, those who worked as early refuse sorters separated usable materials from waste, exposing themselves to sharp objects, decay, and disease. Yet their work contributed to recycling resources in a world where nothing could be easily discarded. Lime plasterers, who applied finishes to walls, handled caustic materials that could burn skin and eyes, working at heights on unstable scaffolding. But their craft added durability and beauty to buildings, making them valuable artisans. Even more demanding were those who worked as scaffolding dismantlers, taking apart temporary structures after construction was completed. While builders faced risks, dismantlers often dealt with weakened or unstable frameworks, increasing the chance of collapse. Yet their work was essential to completing projects. Similarly, trench diggers who prepared defensive or irrigation channels worked in confined spaces where cave-ins or water seepage could occur, but their labor supported both agriculture and protection. In transport, horse relay riders carried urgent messages across long distances, pushing both themselves and their animals to the limit, facing exhaustion, accidents, and attacks. Yet their speed and reliability made them indispensable for communication. Wagon repairers, who fixed broken carts along dangerous roads, often worked in exposed conditions where passing traffic or unstable loads could cause injury. But their services were vital for keeping goods moving. Even within marketplaces, way station operators handled disputes over goods, sometimes facing aggression from traders or customers. Yet their authority ensured fairness in trade. Market porters carried heavy loads through crowded and chaotic environments, risking strain injuries or accidents. But their strength provided a steady income in busy commercial centers. In maritime life, rope climbers, who scaled masts to adjust sails, worked at great heights above unstable decks, facing strong winds and the constant motion of the sea, where a single misstep could be fatal. Yet their skill was essential for navigation and speed. Similarly, bilge cleaners worked in the lowest parts of ships, dealing with foul water, waste, and disease. Yet their role kept vessels functional during long voyages. In rural industries, hedge cutters and land clearers worked with sharp tools in dense vegetation, facing cuts, fatigue, and encounters with wildlife. But their work expanded usable land for farming. Maintenance workers, who descended into existing wells to clean or repair them, risked suffocation, collapse, or contamination. Yet their efforts ensured continued access to water. Even roles tied to celebration and ritual carried risk. Firework handlers in later medieval festivities worked with early explosive materials, facing burns or accidental detonations. Yet their displays brought joy and spectacle to communities. Festival structure builders erected temporary stands and stages, often under time pressure and without stable foundations. But their work enabled gatherings that were central to social life. There were also those who worked as boundary enforcers, ensuring that lands and properties were respected, sometimes facing disputes that could escalate into violence, yet their presence helped maintain order. Toll bridge maintainers repaired crossings under constant use, dealing with structural weaknesses and environmental wear. But their work kept trade routes open. Even more subtle dangers existed in roles like dye ingredient collectors, who gathered plants, minerals, or insects from wild environments, sometimes encountering poisonous species or hazardous terrain, yet their materials were essential for vibrant textiles. Oil press workers handled heavy machinery and flammable substances, risking both mechanical injury and fire. But their products were vital for cooking, lighting, and industry. All of these roles continue to reinforce a powerful and almost overwhelming truth that in the medieval world, danger was not something unusual or avoidable. It was deeply embedded in the structure of life itself. People did not wait for safe opportunities, because such opportunities rarely existed. Instead, they chose from what was available, often selecting paths that balanced risk with reward in the most practical way possible. And within that reality, there was a kind of quiet bravery that defined entire generations. These were not people seeking thrill or recognition for facing danger. They were individuals making calculated decisions, understanding that each risk carried the possibility of survival, progress, or contribution. Their willingness to step into these roles again and again shows a deep resilience, a capacity to adapt to a world where certainty was rare and hardship was common. So even as the list of dangerous medieval jobs continues to grow, it ultimately tells a larger story, not just about the risks themselves, but about the human spirit that faced them, a spirit that did not retreat from difficulty, but instead found ways to live within it, to work through it, and to build something meaningful despite it. In that sense, every dangerous job was more than just a means of survival. It was a testament to the enduring determination of people who refused to stand still in a world that demanded constant courage. And even now, after unfolding layer upon layer of medieval occupations, there are still more roles that reflect how danger was not just present, but deeply accepted as part of everyday existence, with people stepping into these positions not out of ignorance, but out of a clear understanding that risk was often inseparable from reward. Consider the role of a siege supply carrier. Individuals who transported food, weapons, and materials into or within besieged areas, often moving under threat of enemy fire, collapsing defences, or starvation conditions. Yet their contribution was critical to the survival of entire strongholds, giving them both purpose and necessity. Similarly, wall repairers during conflict worked under constant danger, fixing breaches while attacks were ongoing, fully aware that they were among the most exposed targets. Yet their work could determine whether a city stood or fell. In expanding towns, chimney builders, not just cleaners, constructed narrow vertical shafts within unstable structures, working at heights and dealing with confined spaces, yet their role improved ventilation and safety within homes. Limewash applicators coated walls with protective layers, handling substances that could irritate skin and lungs, often working on ladders or scaffolding, but their work preserved buildings against decay. Even those involved in early forms of insulation, using materials like straw, wool, or moss, worked in dusty and allergen-filled environments, yet their contributions improved living conditions. In transportation, ferry rope operators managed the cables or guiding systems that helped boats cross rivers, often dealing with strong currents and heavy tension, where equipment failure could lead to disaster. yet their role ensured consistent movement across waterways. Bridge rope spinners created the thick cords used in suspension or support systems, working with tensioned fibers that could snap violently, but their craftsmanship enabled safer crossings. Even more physically demanding were those who worked as stone polishers, smoothing surfaces of large structures using abrasive materials, often inhaling fine dust that could damage the lungs. Yet their work added refinement and durability to important buildings. Mortar mixers combined materials for construction, sometimes exposed to chemical reactions that could cause burns or irritation, but their role was foundational in nearly every building project. In agricultural storage, silo or pit maintainers ensured that stored grain or food remained usable, often entering confined spaces where oxygen levels could drop or gases could accumulate, posing a silent but deadly risk, yet their work protected vital food supplies. Similarly, smokehouse workers preserved meat by exposing it to controlled smoke, working in enclosed environments, filled with fumes, but their role extended the lifespan of food in a time without refrigeration. In more specialized crafts, mirror makers or polished metal workers used techniques involving heat and chemicals to create reflective surfaces, exposing themselves to burns and toxic substances. Yet their products were rare and valued. Wax seal makers handled hot wax and open flames, working with precision to create official seals. But their role was essential in communication and authentication. Even within communication systems, horn signalers or drum messengers relayed information across distances, sometimes positioned in exposed or elevated areas where they could be targeted or affected by environmental conditions. Yet their signals coordinated movement and response in both civilian and military contexts. Flag bearers in battles or ceremonies carried visible symbols, often becoming prime targets. And even after journeying through so many layers of medieval life, there are still further roles that reveal how deeply intertwined danger and daily work truly were, with individuals continuing to choose paths that demanded endurance, awareness, and a constant acceptance of risk. Consider the role of a water wheel operator, someone responsible for maintaining and adjusting large wooden mechanisms powered by flowing rivers. These wheels could splinter, jam, or collapse under pressure, and workers often had to reach into moving parts to fix problems, risking crushed limbs or being pulled into the current. Yet their work powered mills and industries that sustained entire communities. Similarly, grain threshing supervisors oversaw teams using flails or early devices, where a moment of inattention could lead to serious injury, but their leadership ensured efficiency in one of the most vital processes of food production. In forest and rural economies, sap collectors climbed tall trees to harvest valuable substances, often without secure footing, facing the constant danger of falling. Yet their materials were used in medicines, adhesives, and construction. Firewood bundlers and carriers, though seemingly simple labourers, often handled heavy loads over long distances, risking strain, falls, and encounters with wildlife. But their work fueled homes and industries alike. Even mushroom and herb foragers, who gathered items from the wild, faced the risk of poisoning, misidentification, or dangerous terrain. Yet their knowledge was essential for both food and medicine. In expanding urban areas, plaster repair workers climbed aging structures to fix cracks and damage, often dealing with unstable surfaces that could give way beneath them. yet their work maintained the safety and appearance of buildings. Street pavers laid stones for roads, working with heavy materials and tools, exposed to weather and physical exhaustion. But their efforts improved travel and trade. Similarly, drainage slope builders shaped land to direct water flow, often working in muddy, unstable ground where slips or collapses were common. Even more intense were those who worked as kiln unloaders, removing finished goods from still. Hot ovens, facing burns and inhaling residual fumes, yet their role kept production cycles moving in industries like pottery and brickmaking. Coal gatherers in early mining areas collected surface coal or dug shallow pits exposed to toxic dust and cave-ins. But their fuel-powered heating and metalwork. Resin torch makers combined flammable materials to create lighting tools, constantly working near open flames and volatile substances. Yet their products lit homes and streets. In river and lake regions, reed boat builders crafted small vessels from natural materials, often working near water, with sharp tools and unstable footing. But their creations enabled fishing and transport. Net casters and repairers handled heavy wet equipment, sometimes entangling themselves accidentally. Yet their skill supported entire fishing communities. Even duck or bird catchers used traps and nets in marshes, facing disease, drowning risks and harsh conditions. But their catches provided food and trade goods. In construction support roles, wedge makers produced the small but essential tools used to split wood or stone, working with repeated hammering and sharp edges that could easily cause injury. Yet their products were fundamental to larger projects. Beam lifters and aligners worked beneath heavy structures, guiding placement while exposed to crushing hazards. But their coordination ensured the stability of buildings. Similarly, scaffolding rope tighteners maintained tension in support systems, where failure could lead to catastrophic collapse, yet their precision kept entire structures standing, even in household-level production. Butter churners and cheese press operators handled repetitive, physically demanding processes that could lead to strain or accidents. Yet their work contributed to daily sustenance. Grain grinders using hand mills risked injury from rotating stones. But their labor ensured food preparation at the most basic level. There were also those who worked as early forms of signal relay runners, passing messages between stations at high speed, often over difficult terrain, risking exhaustion or injury. Yet their efforts enabled communication across distances. Boundary stone setters marked land divisions, sometimes in contested areas where disputes could turn violent. But their work helped define ownership and order. What becomes increasingly clear with every additional role is that medieval people lived in a world where danger was not compartmentalized. It was everywhere, woven into even the smallest tasks. Yet instead of retreating from it, they adapted, learned, and built systems around it, turning risky environments into functional spaces where life could continue. The willingness to engage in such work was not born out of recklessness, but out of necessity combined with a deep practical understanding of what each role could provide. Whether it was food, shelter, income, or a sense of identity, these jobs offered something tangible in return for the risks they demanded. And in a time where opportunities were limited and survival was never guaranteed, that exchange was often worth it. So even as the list continues to grow, it reinforces a powerful and enduring image of medieval society not as a time defined solely by hardship, but as one shaped by individuals who continuously chose to act despite uncertainty. People who stepped into dangerous roles not because they were easy, but because they were meaningful, necessary, or simply the best option available. And in that sense, every additional dangerous job adds another voice to the same story. A story of resilience, where human beings faced a world full of risks and still found ways to build, contribute, and move forward, proving that even in the harshest conditions, determination could transform danger into a path towards survival and purpose. And even after uncovering such an extensive range of perilous medieval occupations, the picture still expands with yet more roles that underline how deeply danger was embedded into the rhythm of life, where people did not merely endure risk, but often leaned into it as a necessary trade. Offer stability, survival, or even a small sense of pride. Consider the work of a floodgate operator, someone responsible for opening and closing water barriers to control river flow. These individuals often worked in fast-moving waters during storms or seasonal surges, where timing was critical, and mistakes could lead to drowning or widespread destruction. Yet their role directly protected farmland and settlements, making it both essential and respected. Similarly, irrigation channel keepers managed water distribution across fields, working in slippery, unstable environments where collapses or sudden water releases could occur, but their efforts sustained agriculture, the backbone of medieval life. In the world of transport infrastructure, roadstone compactors manually packed and leveled surfaces using heavy tools, often working under harsh weather conditions and risking strain or injury. Yet their labor improved the durability of roads. Bridge plank replacers worked over open water or deep drops, removing and installing wooden sections while balancing on narrow supports, where a single misstep could be fatal. But their maintenance kept vital connections intact. Even ditch cover installers, who placed protective layers over drainage systems, worked with unstable ground that could give way beneath them. Yet their work improved safety in growing towns. In rural industries, grain sack carriers lifted and transported heavy loads repeatedly, often suffering from long-term physical damage or sudden accidents. Yet their strength was indispensable in markets and storage facilities. Haystack builders climbed tall piles of loose material, where slipping or collapse was common, but their work preserved fodder for animals. Similarly, fence builders handled sharp tools and worked in rough terrain, facing cuts, fatigue, and exposure, yet their structures defined property and protected crops. Even more specialized were those who worked as early insulation packers, filling walls or roofs with materials like straw or wool, often dealing with dust and allergens that could affect breathing. Yet their contributions improved living comfort. Chimney draft testers checked airflow by lighting controlled fires and observing smoke patterns, sometimes exposing themselves to dangerous fumes, but their work helped prevent larger hazards like smoke buildup or fire. In trade environments, cargo waggers handled heavy goods and balance systems, sometimes dealing with unstable loads that could shift suddenly, yet their accuracy ensured fair transactions. Storage stackers arranged goods in warehouses or granaries, working in confined spaces where collapses or falling items were a constant threat. But their organization supported efficient trade and supply. In maritime and river settings, anchor handlers managed heavy anchors and chains, often under tension and in unstable conditions, where a sudden release could cause severe injury, yet their role was crucial for docking and navigation. Riverbank stabilizers worked to prevent erosion, often standing in soft, shifting ground near water currents. But their efforts protected land and infrastructure. Even within craft production, mold makers created forms for casting objects, handling heated materials and fine dust. Yet their precision enabled mass production of tools and goods. Tool testers deliberately stressed equipment to ensure durability, risking breakage and injury, but their work improved safety for others. Similarly, blade sharpeners worked with spinning wheels and sharp edges, where slips could be severe. And even now, after unfolding what feels like an endless catalogue of perilous roles, the medieval world continues to reveal yet more occupations where danger was not only present, but almost inseparable from the idea of work itself, with people stepping into these roles because they offered some form of control in an otherwise uncertain life. Consider the task of a watchfire wood supplier. Individuals who gathered and delivered large quantities of fuel to keep signal fires ready at all times. This meant venturing into forests at odd hours, facing wild animals, rough terrain, and exhaustion. Yet their work ensured communication and defense systems remained active. Similarly, beacon maintenance workers climbed elevated platforms to repair or prepare fire structures, often exposed to wind, height, and the constant risk of falling. But their role connected distant communities in times of need. In agrarian systems, threshing floor maintainers prepared and repaired open areas where crops were processed, working under intense sun and dust. Filled conditions that affected breathing and stamina, yet their work directly influenced food output. Grain drying attendants monitored heated surfaces or raised platforms used to remove moisture from crops, where overheating or fire hazards were constant threats. But their role prevented spoilage and ensured storage longevity. Even scarecrow keepers, who might seem insignificant, often spent long hours isolated in fields, exposed to weather, and sometimes tasked with actively chasing away animals. Yet their presence protected vital harvests. In construction, related tasks, ladder stabilizers worked alongside builders, holding and adjusting ladders on uneven ground, where a slip could endanger both themselves and others. Yet their support enabled work at height. Load balancers guided heavy materials being lifted or moved, often standing directly beneath or beside suspended weight, fully aware that a miscalculation could be fatal, but their precision ensured successful placement. Similarly, wedge removers extracted temporary supports after construction phases, often at moments when structures were most unstable. Yet their timing was essential for progress. In trade and storage, barrel rollers transported heavy casks across docks or warehouses, risking crushed limbs or loss of control on uneven surfaces. Yet their labor kept goods flowing efficiently. Stack measurers climbed piles of goods to estimate volume or count inventory, often working at height without support. But their role ensured accurate trade. Even warehouse sweepers, dealing with dust, debris, and sharp fragments, faced respiratory and physical hazards. Yet their work maintained order in busy storage areas. In river and coastal environments, driftwood collectors gathered materials from shorelines, often battling waves and slippery rocks. Yet their findings could be repurposed for fuel or construction, Net untanglers worked to fix damaged fishing gear, sometimes under pressure to act quickly, handling heavy, wet materials that could trap or injure them. Yet their skill restored essential tools for livelihood. Similarly, shell gatherers along coasts faced sharp edges, tides, and exposure, but their harvest contributed to food and trade, even within craft production. Spindle thread testers ensured the strength of spun fibers by applying tension, sometimes causing sudden snaps that could injure hands or eyes, yet their work guaranteed quality in textile production. Die-vat stirrers worked over large containers of heated liquid, exposed to fumes and the risk of splashes, but their role ensured consistent colouring. Tool handle fitters shaped and secured grips onto blades or instruments, working with force and precision where slips could lead to injury. Yet their work improved usability and safety for others. There were also those who worked in early forms of environmental clearing, such as brush burners, who set controlled fires to clear land, constantly managing the risk of flames spreading beyond control. Yet their work prepared fields for cultivation. Stone line markers arranged boundaries using rocks, often in remote or contested areas, facing both environmental and human risks. But their efforts defined ownership and order. Even in roles tied to daily maintenance, ash pit cleaners removed residues from fireplaces or industrial settings, dealing with fine particles that could harm the lungs. Yet their work kept systems functioning. Water trough fillers ensured animals had access to water, often working around large, unpredictable creatures. Yet their tasks supported agriculture and transport. In communication networks, relay horn assistants helped amplify or pass signals, sometimes positioned in exposed or elevated areas, yet their coordination ensured messages travelled efficiently. Path repair helpers filled potholes or cleared obstructions, often working with minimal tools in active routes, facing accidents or strain, but their work improved safety for travellers. All of these additional roles continue to deepen the same realization, that in the medieval world, danger was not something exceptional or rare, but something ordinary, woven into even the smallest responsibilities. People did not divide work into safe and unsafe categories as clearly as we might today. Instead, they assessed what each role could offer and accepted the risks as part of the exchange. And what remains most striking is the consistency of human behavior across all these examples, the willingness to act despite uncertainty, to take on roles that demanded effort and courage, and to find meaning within those roles even when they came with significant danger. These were not people chasing risk for its own sake, but individuals making practical decisions in a world where every path carried its own challenges. So even as the list grows almost endlessly, it ultimately reinforces a powerful and enduring truth about medieval life, that it was built not on comfort but on resilience. A resilience that allowed people to face danger, not with hesitation, but with acceptance, turning necessity into action and risk into a foundation upon which entire societies were built. And even after tracing what seems like an endless chain of hazardous occupations, the medieval world still unfolds with further roles that reveal just how ordinary danger had become, woven so tightly into daily life that people no longer viewed it as something exceptional, but simply as part of the cost of existing and working. Consider the role of a firewood stack keeper. someone responsible for arranging and maintaining large piles of fuel where instability could cause sudden collapses, crushing injuries or accidents. Yet their careful organization ensured a steady supply of heat and energy for homes and workshops. Similarly, kiln fire tenders worked continuously to maintain the right temperature in ovens used for pottery, bricks, or metalwork, often staying awake for long hours in intense heat, exposed to smoke and the constant threat of flare-ups. But their vigilance was crucial for successful production. In agricultural logistics, crop transport coordinators managed the movement of harvested goods using carts and animals, navigating uneven terrain where loads could shift or overturn. Yet their role ensured that food reached markets and storage safely. Hay bale binders tied and secured loose materials into manageable bundles, often working in unstable piles, where slips or collapses were common, but their work preserved valuable fodder. Even seed spreaders, moving across large fields, faced exhaustion and environmental exposure. Yet their effort laid the foundation for future harvests. In riverbank economies, mud brick moulders shaped construction materials from wet earth, working in slippery, unstable conditions where footing was uncertain and fatigue constant. Yet their bricks formed the basis of many structures. Clay diggers extracted raw materials from pits that could collapse or flood, but their work supported pottery and construction industries. Similarly, sand sifters separated usable grains from debris, often inhaling fine dust that could affect their lungs. Yet their precision improved material quality. Even more demanding were those who worked as load rope adjusters, ensuring tension and balance in systems used to lift or transport goods, often dealing with sudden shifts in weight that could snap ropes or cause accidents. Yet their role was essential in preventing larger failures. Pulley maintainers repaired and adjusted lifting mechanisms, working at height or under strain. But their skill kept complex systems functioning. In food preparation and preservation, grain roasters worked with heated surfaces and open flames, where burns or smoke inhalation were constant risks. Yet their role improved food storage and flavor. Salt packers handled coarse materials that could irritate skin and eyes, often working in dry, harsh environments. But their work ensured proper preservation of goods. Similarly, oil lamp fillers handled flammable substances in enclosed spaces where a single mistake could cause fire, yet their task provided light in darkness. In urban maintenance, wall scrubbers cleaned surfaces using abrasive tools and chemicals, sometimes working at height or in confined alleys. Yet their efforts preserved buildings. Street stone resetters repaired uneven pathways, working with heavy materials and tools, exposed to weather and strain, but their work improved daily movement through towns. Even in transport support, animal harness fitters worked closely with large animals, adjusting equipment that required precision and strength, facing the risk of sudden movement or injury. Yet their work enabled efficient travel and trade. Cartload stabilizers ensured goods were balanced properly, often climbing onto moving or unstable loads, but their role prevented accidents. And even at this point, when it feels as though every corner of medieval life has been explored, there are still more roles that quietly demonstrate how danger was embedded into even the most routine responsibilities, where people continue to choose work not because it was safe, but because it was necessary and offered some form of stability or meaning. Consider the role of a roof beam carrier, someone who transported heavy wooden beams up ladders or scaffolding, balancing immense weight while navigating narrow paths at height, where a single misstep could result in a fatal fall, yet their strength and coordination were essential for construction. Similarly, scaffold plank setters laid the very surfaces others would stand on, often testing unstable footing themselves first. But without their work, no building could rise. In farming support, irrigation gate lifters manually raised or lowered wooden barriers to control water flow, often working with slippery mechanisms under pressure, where sudden releases could knock them off balance. Yet their efforts ensured crops received the right amount of water. Crop watchers guarded fields against animals or theft, spending long hours exposed to weather and isolation, sometimes confronting intruders or wild creatures, yet their vigilance protected livelihoods. Even grain sack stitchers who repaired torn storage bags worked with sharp needles and coarse materials that could injure hands, yet their work prevented loss of valuable harvests. In material handling, stone chip collectors gathered fragments from quarrying or construction sites, working in areas where debris could still fall or shift, yet their efforts ensured nothing was wasted. Timber stack aligners arranged logs into stable formations, constantly aware that a poorly balanced pile could collapse. But their precision made storage and transport possible. Similarly, rope coil organizers managed large lengths of heavy rope, which, if tangled or mishandled, could snap or drag workers, yet their orderliness supported countless operations. In water-related labor, bucket chain operators worked systems that lifted water using linked containers, often dealing with moving parts that could catch clothing or limbs, but their work supported irrigation and supply. Canal edge packers reinforced sides with mud or stone, working in unstable, wet environments, yet their efforts prevented erosion and collapse. Even in smaller crafts, peg makers produced the small wooden fasteners used in construction and tools, working with sharp blades and repetitive motion, where slips could cause injury. Yet their simple products were essential in holding larger systems together. Handle polishers smoothed surfaces of tools, often inhaling fine dust, but their work improved usability and longevity. In marketplaces, stall cloth arrangers set up coverings and goods displays, often climbing makeshift frames or working quickly in crowded spaces, where accidents or conflicts could occur, yet their role enhanced trade and presentation. Coin bag carriers transported small but heavy loads of currency, becoming targets for theft while navigating busy or unsafe routes. Yet their work kept commerce flowing. In transport support, cartwheel lifters raised and adjusted heavy wheels during repairs, working under unstable loads, yet their strength ensured mobility. Harness rope inspectors checked equipment for wear and tear, sometimes under tension, but their vigilance prevented accidents during travel. There were also those who worked in early forms of storage preservation, such as smoke vent adjusters who controlled airflow in storage spaces, often dealing with fumes and enclosed environments, yet their work protected stored goods. Grain aerators manually stirred stored crops to prevent spoilage, working in dusty conditions that affected breathing, but their role safeguarded food supplies. In environmental upkeep, brush clearers removed overgrowth from paths and fields, working with sharp tools and facing hidden hazards. Yet their labor maintained accessibility. Pathstone collectors gathered materials for repairs, often working along active routes where accidents could happen. But their efforts supported infrastructure, even in communication and coordination. Signal flag preparers maintained the tools used for visual messaging, often working in exposed or elevated areas. Yet their role ensured clarity in signaling systems. Messenger rest station keepers maintained stopping points for couriers, often isolated and vulnerable. Yet their presence enabled long-distance communication. What becomes almost overwhelming at this stage is not just the sheer number of dangerous jobs, but how deeply normalized they were. There was no clear boundary between safe and unsafe work. Instead, nearly every task carried some degree of risk, and people simply learned to operate within those conditions. Danger was not something that stopped life. It was something life moved through. And perhaps the most striking realization is that these individuals were not defined by the risks they faced, but by the consistency with which they faced them. Day after day, they stepped into roles that demanded attention, effort, and courage. Not in dramatic bursts, but in quiet, ongoing ways that built the foundation of their world. So even as the list continues to grow, it ultimately becomes less about the specific jobs and more about the enduring human capacity to adapt. Medieval people did not wait for a safer world. They created a functioning one within the dangers they had. And in doing so, they demonstrated a powerful truth that echoes across time, that even when risk is unavoidable, people will still find ways to work, to contribute, and to move forward, shaping their lives with determination in a world that offered no guarantees. And even now, when it feels like every possible corner of medieval labor has been explored, there are still more roles that quietly reveal how danger extended into even the smallest, most overlooked tasks, shaping a world where people constantly balanced risk with necessity. Consider the role of a water trough cleaner, someone tasked with removing stagnant water, algae, and debris from communal animal troughs, often working in slippery conditions, surrounded by large, unpredictable animals, where a sudden movement could cause injury, yet their work ensured clean water for livestock, which was vital for agriculture and transport. Similarly, ash scatterers distributed fireplace or kiln ash over fields as fertilizer, handling fine particles that could irritate the lungs and eyes. But their efforts enriched soil and improved crop yield. In storage and supply systems, grain sack patchers repaired worn or damaged containers using coarse thread and sharp tools, working quickly to prevent loss of valuable produce, yet risking repeated injuries to hands. Storage pit sealers covered underground food reserves, often working in confined spaces with limited air, where suffocation or collapse was a real threat. But their role protected essential supplies. Even crate binders secured wooden boxes with rope or metal fastenings working under tension that could snap unexpectedly. Yet their work ensured goods could be transported safely. In construction support, mortar crack fillers repaired small fractures in walls, often working at height or on unstable surfaces. Yet their attention to detail preserved structural integrity. Beam wedge adjusters tuned the positioning of large wooden supports, often standing beneath heavy loads, but their precision prevented collapse. Similarly, foundation soil packers compressed earth around structures, working in trenches where cave-ins could occur, yet their labor stabilized buildings. In rural labor, crop bundlers tied harvested plants into manageable sheaves, often working in uneven fields under intense sun, risking exhaustion or minor injuries. Yet their work made transport possible. Irrigation trench cleaners removed blockages from narrow channels, working in muddy, unstable environments, where slips were common, but their efforts maintained water flow. Even scareline installers stretched ropes or materials across fields to deter animals, working at height or across wide areas. Yet their work protected crops. In trade and transport, load counter markers tracked goods moving through markets or storage areas, often navigating crowded spaces where accidents or disputes could arise. Yet their role ensured accountability. Wagon brake handlers manually controlled speed on slopes, often using physical force to slow heavy loads, where failure could lead to runaway carts, but their skill prevented disasters. Rope drag assistants helped move large objects by pulling coordinated lines where sudden jerks or imbalance could cause injury. Yet their teamwork enabled heavy transport. In water-based tasks, riverbank mud shapers reinforced edges using natural materials, working close to shifting ground and flowing water. Yet their work reduced erosion. Fish basket carriers transported catches over slippery surfaces, balancing heavy loads while avoiding falls. But their labor connected fishermen to markets. Even small boat pushers guided vessels from shore, working in unstable footing where waves or currents could pull them in. Yet their role supported docking and departure. In craft and production, thread knot fixers repaired broken fibers during weaving, working with fine tension that could snap and cause minor injury. Yet their attention preserved entire pieces of fabric. Needle threaders in workshops handled delicate tools for long periods, straining eyes and hands. But their work supported larger textile operations. Wax smoother workers shaped and finished candles or seals, handling warm materials that could burn skin. Yet their finishing touches improved usability.